As you can see from the title, this is not going to be a review of the general sense. Rather, this is going to be a recommendation video where I will be explaining the virtues of a particular fantasy novel series that I've spent the past couple months reading and have found myself thoroughly engrossed in. And that series is called the Elric Saga by Michael Moorcock, that was written over the span of several decades. This novel series is very important for any fantasy fan, and I would argue for any literary fan, because it presents the middle ground between Lord of the Rings and what would eventually be known as dark fantasy or Game of Thrones. So if you want to see how we got from the likes of the noble Aragorn and Legolas and Gimli to Jon Snow, Jaime Lannister and all that fine shit, and many other examples of other dark fantasy universes, this is the inception point. This is that middle ground where it all spawned from. This is where Arthas and Frostmourne come from. This is where Kain and the Soul Reaver from the Legacy of Kain franchise come from. This is where a lot of shit, possibly plagiarized by The Witcher, I don't know, I didn't do extensive research on that subject, but the evidence is pretty compelling on that front that The Witcher did in fact steal blatantly a lot of shit from this series too. And Elric, as a character, has many other influences in many other things that go well beyond the stuff I just mentioned, and his popularity, while waning in these newer times that we live in, was at one point on top of the world. I mean, fucking David Bowie was a massive fanboy of the character, and there's several important bands that still, do songs to this very day that very much take inspiration from the Elric storylines. And the story of Elric is one of an anti-hero, one of the original, if not the original anti-heroes in fiction. The whole thing with Elric is that he lives in the time of the twilight of the old world. And he is the last emperor of the Melnibonéan race. And the Melnibonéans are not elves or dwarves or some kind of super long-lived species that is, from the generic fantasy routes. They are above humans, but not in that, like I said, generic sense of the word. They are unhuman in the way that they have had an empire that has existed for 10,000 years. And in that time, they have basically conquered the entire world, and they have had dealings with various sources of both magic, sometimes from chaos, sometimes from the elemental spirits that reside throughout the world, and they've made various pacts with these spirits. And all of these magical abilities, this almost inborn affinity towards magic, is what allowed the Melnibonéans to, like I said, conquer the entire world. And because of their magical abilities, and because they have motherfucking dragons, these guys, like I said, took over the world with rapid ease. But at the time of Elric, the Empire has basically whittled down to only its capital city of Ymir on the Dragon Isles. This is the last vestige of what was once called the Bright Empire, and like anything that has existed for 10,000 years, the Melnibonéans are decadent. A lot of them spend copious amounts of time drug-addicted, leaving the material world to basically live in their own little fantasy universes and only waking up so that they can get high once again and basically waste away in the real world while they live in some kind of drug-fueled fantasy of their own. While the Melnibonéans who choose not to spend the rest of their days like this are very decadent. They're very cruel, they're very proud, and despite the fact that their empire is basically a shadow of its former self, they still command a very big presence in the world around them. A world that is rapidly being taken over by, you guessed it, humanity. But because these guys are such prominent figures in the history of the entire world, just the fact that they exist is enough to scare the ever-loving shit out of anybody who tries to fuck with them. Because these guys are like living legends. This is like if Hercules built his own empire and it lasted to today, and even if it was just one city big, you would know from the various legends surrounding Hercules that he is a dude you don't want to fuck with, even if his once glorious empire has been whittled down to one city. It's kind of like that. And Elric is, like I said, the final emperor of the Melnibonéan race. He is the last of the line, and what's really interesting about Elric in comparison to the rest of his species, isn't just that he's an albino, but that he also has something resembling a conscience. Now, the Melnibonéans are very much alien in the way they think about things. They don't really have, like I said, a conscience in the human way of meaning it. They don't really have concepts like justice. They don't have concepts of like right and wrong. Whereas in our world, even back in the ye olden days of swords and bows and arrows and all that shit, we still always wondered about the moral questions of the world. We wondered, what is our place in them? Why do we do things? Why do we exist? We wonder, is it right for somebody to kill his brother's murderer? Is that revenge? Is that justice? Is that justified? And the Melnibonéans do not give a shit about this kind of stuff. They know that they are better than other people, even in their twilight years, and they have never concerned themselves with these kinds of ideas. And this is what makes them alien to other people and what makes them even more fearsome. And these guys do not wonder, they don't even understand what the fucking conscience is. They don't understand really concepts of even love in the way humans do. They don't get lots of these intricate concepts that have been part of human history, you know, almost from the very beginning. But Elric is different from them in the fact that he is intrigued by these concepts of conscience, of justice, of right and wrong, and he knows that the Empire is in its twilight years and that one day humanity will destroy them if they don't learn and adapt. And at the end of the very first book, the first chronological book, I should say, Elric goes into self-imposed exile, and he wants to travel through the young kingdoms, the kingdoms of mankind, and learn from them. He wants to see how they're progressing. He wants to see how they act, how they think, so that he can come back, take these lessons he's learned, and apply them to the Melnibonéan race so that his species can get a big kickstart in the world. And what's really interesting about Elric, once again, is the fact that he's an albino. And Elric, because he is an albino, he is naturally very, very weak. Many, many times throughout the novels, his deficient bloodline is obviously mentioned and is used as both a plot device and as something to fuel his character forward, because Elric needs to use drugs and various different kinds of herbs just to keep himself going. And because of this, you have a character who is simultaneously very powerful in the way that he can summon these powerful elemental spirits, but who can also, in the span of like 5 minutes, go from being the most OP motherfucker in the storyline to being as harmless as a baby kitten. But this is where another interesting story element is brought in, and that is Stormbringer, his iconic sword, the original soul-sucking sword of fantasy, from which Frostmourne and the Soul Reaver and countless other fictional blades that eat souls have sprung from. And Stormbringer is very interesting in the way that it's like a drug that Elric hates, but he has to use it. Basically, when Stormbringer kills somebody, it takes their soul, and it gives this energy to Elric, and it makes him more powerful. It basically acts as a replacement for the various herbs and drugs that he needs to use on a daily basis to keep himself going. But Stormbringer is a malevolent entity, and there are quite a few times throughout the entire novel series where Stormbringer will, of its own volition, regardless of what Elric wants or says, it will kill his friends, it'll kill his family, it'll kill his lovers, it'll kill those who are closest to him the same way it'll kill those who are his enemies. And because it is a malevolent force, you have this very interesting question that's constantly brought up between Elric and other characters, and sometimes between Elric and himself, where Elric goes into like this battle lust rage, where he just enjoys slaughtering people. And you're never really quite sure if that is because Elric is a Melnibonéan, a species that has this natural tendency towards murder and cruelty, or is that Stormbringer bringing out this side of Elric, or perhaps creating this side of Elric and using it to feed itself. And once you see the ending of the storyline, which I won't spoil here because it's actually pretty fucking brilliant, it raises lots and lots of more questions than it answers. And Elric himself is very much a tortured protagonist. He's very much, I would even say, kind of like a Byronic hero, where he very much laments his fate. He laments the fact that he is deficient. He laments the fact that his mother died giving birth to him, and the fact that his father was never properly able to love him. And as the storyline progresses and he goes from like this more idealistic figure into someone who has possibly the worst fate imaginable you could ever conceive, you just see this kind of downward spiral where he keeps trying to find meaning in a meaningless universe. And this is exacerbated by another element of the storyline that has nothing but shades of gray, and that is the conflict between the higher lords of the universe. And these guys are basically the lords of law and the lords of chaos. The lords of law, of course, are people, gods concerning law. These are the guys who are supposed to bring order to an orderless universe, and chaos is all about disorder. It is all about perpetually changing things. It's all about perpetually twisting the status quo. And chaos definitely gets a lot more focus in the storyline because Elric is directly associated with chaos. In fact, one of his saviors many times and one of his greatest allies throughout all the books is one of the Dukes of Chaos, Arioch. And Arioch frequently helps him out. And because Elric is so connected with chaos, you see firsthand the effects of chaos. And then you just have these really fucking weird shapes where chaos is perpetually twisting, say, animal life. So you're going to have like this fucking elephant that has the head of a vulture. You're going to have an alligator that has the wings of a bat and the tail of like a tiger. And that's just one of the most fucked up examples I can think of off the top of my head that includes chaos. And what's really interesting about both of them is that they're neither presented as both good or bad. They both have positives and negative sides. And one of the few kind of definitive answers that I myself can glean from the storyline in general is that both need one another to exist, because we see worlds that are made of just of chaos and just of law. And in a world where law is everything, nothing changes. There is no human life. There is no life at all. There's just stagnant, unchanging nature. There's not even water, because water is perpetually in motion. Water is perpetually, changing its shape and transforming itself into other things, and that is very chaotic. And if you create a world where there's nothing but order, nothing exists. Like, everything is stagnant. There's no forward progress because there's nothing to break the status quo. There's no one to say, hey, what if I combine two rocks together to make a fire? There's no one to do that. But on the flip side, if you create a world of pure chaos, everything is also stagnant because everything is always changing. Nothing ever stays the same from minute to minute. So 1 second, chaos is going to look like, I don't know, a refrigerator, let's say. It's going to look like a refrigerator, and then it's going to look like an alligator, and then it's going to go into like completely other bizarre combinations of the two, or combinations of a million other things. But because there is no foundation for anything, because the foundation is always being twisted around, there is, once again, nothing but stagnation. There is nothing, solid to build a foundation off of and to build something from. And the Earth, the version of Earth that Elric lives in, is like the battleground between the Lords of Chaos and the Lords of Law, and you see the positives and the negatives of both sides, how both Chaos and Law can be extremely manipulative towards mortals, how they can basically force mortals into destinies, quote-unquote, that are highly destructive for themselves and the world around them. And one of the biggest answers and biggest questions that's posed throughout the entire series is, what is better? What is order and chaos? Why are order and chaos even fighting one another? Why do they exist? What is the point of our struggling if we can never achieve true victory? And so why do we struggle? And this is once again increased, this ambiguity is increased by the concept of the multiverse, where there is a seemingly endless version of Ariochs and different versions of characters who exist between universes, different versions of Earth, where this battle is being fought on constantly. And this is where we get another concept that is, synonymous with the author of this series and many others, Michael Moorcock. And Michael Moorcock's whole concept is that every universe has the eternal champion. It has this kind of archetype who exists on every version of Earth, be it in a fantasy setting or a sci-fi setting or a modern day real world kind of setting, who basically has to act as the balance between chaos and law. And several of these other champions of the Eternal Champions actually go on to star in their own series, like Elric and Hawkmoon and Corum, all of whom meet Elric at different points and team up with him, and then they get spun off into their own characters who have their own journeys and storylines that are divorced from Elric, but take place in the same multiverse. And so you have some storylines where the Eternal Champion decides to destroy all chaos and he creates a lawful world, or he destroys all law and creates pure chaos, or he just fucking kills everybody, and I mean fucking everybody from the mortals to the gods, and he leaves only himself left until he dies, and then there's nothing left but a big blank slate in the heavens and on the earth. And once again, that exacerbates the whole question of why do we struggle? What is the point of all of this? But besides the ending of the final chronological novel Stormbringer, I think the conversation and the conflict that truly brings this whole idea of why do we exist, why do we keep going on, that is done so well on a personal level for Elric, a character who's very introspective, a character who very often finds despair in the world around him, the meaninglessness of the world, and being used as a puppet by both the gods of law and chaos, and sometimes even the cosmic balance. His greatest, I feel, a moment, besides the many that are in Stormbringer, comes from one of the novels in the earlier chronological timeline, and that is The Revenge of the Rose. And the thing with The Revenge of the Rose is that Elric comes face to face and conflicts with another very prominent figure in the multiverse, and that's Gaynor, the Damned Prince. And the thing between Elric and Gaynor is the fact that they're both servants of higher powers, Elric of chaos, but Gaynor was once a servant of the balance. He was a part of preserving a natural, equilibrium between law and chaos. But for his own selfish purposes, he betrayed balance. He became one of the servants of chaos, much like Elric is throughout most of the Elric Saga. But because he betrayed the balance, he was cursed with immortality, and so he can't die. Everything else, lives on, and and eventually, withers away and dies. But he is constant. He just lives on and on and on. Nothing can kill him. Nothing can wound him. Nothing can destroy him. And because he is immortal and because he has lived for so long, all he wants to do is to find death. And because of his own pathetic lot in life and because of his own bad decisions destroying him, he is a guy who has lost all self-respect. He is a guy who lives for nothing but, ironically, death, whether it's the death of those around him or his own, which is his own ultimate conclusion. And because he has lost all that self-respect for himself, for life around him, he, throughout many times in the Revenge of the Rose novel, he switches alliances, sometimes working for himself, sometimes working for chaos, and sometimes allying with Elric, all for the express purpose of finding death for himself. And some of the moments where he subjects himself to a new master are really kind of gut-wrenching, because Elric himself recognizes something inside of him. But the difference between Elric and Gaynor is this, that even though Stormbringer and Chaos and Elric's other problems, sometimes those of other people being inflicted on him, or the pain he inflicts on self because of his own, sometimes twisted personality, throughout all of that bullshit, Elric genuinely respects himself, and he has genuine affection for the earth and those closest to him. And he's willing to go to great lengths to save them, even if sometimes his actions kill them, or sometimes he kills them himself, because sometimes circumstances just go out of his way. It's very much a John Constantine kind of thing going on there. But the thing with Elric is that he has respect for himself. So even though Elric frequently calls Arioch his patron Duke of Hell for aid, Elric only wants to use Arioch. He will never become Arioch's mindless drone. He will always want to fight against being used as a puppet by a higher being. He will always strive to keep his own sense of self going. And because he has this kind of sense of self-respect in himself, and kind of respect for other people, even many times those who are his enemy, Elric can never become a soulless drone like Gaynor, who just wants to die. Because Elric can fucking kill himself at any point he wants, but because he has that sense of self-respect, as I already stated beforehand, he will never bring himself up to do this. And even if situations get really, really fucking bad, and trust me, they do for him, he will always, always, in his own way, strive to keep that self-respect for himself and for other people and the world around him preserved in his own ways. And once again, that's just one example of many myriads of others of Elric coming in conflict with another character who has an ideology very similar to his own, but also distinctly different. But don't misjudge this as me calling Elric a heroic character, because, like I said, he is prone to being very cruel, very violent, with or without Stormbringer. He's capable of being greatly selfish. He's capable of showing great love and affection and loyalty for those around him, and he feels like an actual person who would be kind of fucked up by the fact that he has like this deficient body. He hails from a species of cruel murderers, and he is living in a world that is pretty fucked up in its own way. So Elric is actually pretty damn good, mentally wise, considering some of the shit that happens to him before the main storyline even starts. And by the end of it, goddamn, it is probably one of the most impressive tests of mental fortitude I've ever seen being put through on a fictional character. And on a final note, the reason why I think you should read the Elric Saga is also because it gives you a good glimpse into the evolution of Michael Moorcock's writing, because unlike a lot of novels, the Elric storylines were not written in chronological order, and they were most of the time not even written in the same fucking decade. For example, books like The Black Sword, The Vanishing Tower, Weird of the White Wolf, and Stormbringer, which are most of the final chronological books, are written in the 60s. And then some of the books in the earlier timeline like Elric of Melnibone and The Sailor on the Seven Seas of Fate. And then two other books are written in the 80s, Fortress of the Pearl and the aforementioned The Revenge of the Rose. They were written in the 80s. And because the books are written at different times, and because Michael Moorcock's experiences and thoughts and writing style are gradually getting more and more refined as the time passes on, you see a really interesting kind of up and down scale of writing talent being put on the showcase. For example, in the 60s, it's very much like that Frank Miller raw rage that you can only find in a young, pissed off man. It's very much Michael Moorcock being, like I said, Frank Miller circa The Dark Knight Returns, where he's a pissed off young man at the world, at himself, at his own lot in life, constantly questioning what the fuck is the purpose of anything, why the fuck are we here, why the fuck do we bother doing anything, and that raw rage, that genuine raw anger leads him into some truly fantastic bits of storytelling that, while very unrefined at certain points and sometimes jarring or even downright underdeveloped, lends itself to, circumnavigating these various flaws that I already stated before, because the emotion is so genuine, it is so powerful, and is so mostly successfully conveyed that the issues you do find in the storylines, like some things not being developed properly, or some storylines maybe meandering a bit and not being as interesting as others, are, small potatoes compared to the shit that really, really works. And then you get to the 70s stuff where Michael Moorcock kind of combines his later refinement with the anger of youth. And so you have like this combination of the two where the writing is a lot more refined, where a lot of the storylines are, even a bit more fucking batshit crazy, because like Sailor on the Seven Seas of Fate, for those of you who are Grant Morrison fans, if you want to see a fantasy take on something that's kind of like Grant Morrison with like the multiverse and the concept of the Eternal Champion, you owe it to yourself to read Sailor on the Seven Seas of Fate, because that shit is fucking psychedelic. And that's just me reading the novel version. If you actually read the comic book version of that, it's completely batshit Grant Morrison insane. So definitely check that out. But as I was saying, because Moorcock is a bit older but still, fairly pissed off, he's also gotten a lot more experience as a writer, and so his writing style is a lot more refined. But the 80s books are the most refined, and they're very, very different in the fact that Moorcock isn't so much as angry as that he's very introspective. It's kind of like when you reach a certain age in your life, and then you look back at what happened beforehand, and you wonder to yourself, huh, I found this stuff really important in my life. I used to make a big deal out of this, and now it just seems like small potatoes. It's kind of like when you get into college, and then you think about your days in high school, and you're just like, man, like homework for math used to be like the biggest deal ever for me. I was dying and trying to complete that shit. But now when you look back at it, now that you're kind of getting into life and you're seeing what actual studying is about and what life actually is, it seems kind of stupid to make a big deal out of that stuff. But Michael Moorcock doesn't do it in a mocking way where he's like, man, all that stuff I wrote beforehand was fucking stupid. It's more like, it's kind of like an old sage reflecting on his, youthful, pissed off youth and giving you insight into that and kind of using Elric as a way of being even more introspective in a more older man, sagely fashion. So, and also the fact that the writing is even more refined. It's even better here. Like, there's literally no point in either Fortress of the Pearl or The Revenge of the Rose where I'm like, this is kind of amateurish, or this is not as developed as it could have been. Like, no, everything is developed. That raw passion for writing still exists, but it's been tempered by decades of age, by experience in both writing and in life, and seeing that be brought into focus is really, really great stuff. It's something that I can't say a lot of fantasy novels do have outside of chronological order. So if you want to see like the evolution of one of what I consider to be already one of the greatest writers I've ever read in my life, there that element is. So yeah, I probably didn't do as good of a job at conveying all this shit as I could have, but the whole point of this video is that the Elric Saga is something special. It is something worth reading. It is something that when I completed, I found myself completely lost because I don't know what the fuck should I read anymore. I don't know what can I read that can possibly match this. It's kind of like when you watch like the ultimate something, and then when you finish it, you're just like, what the fuck am I gonna read besides this over again that can possibly match this? And even though I'm like trying to check out Michael Moorcock's other work, like the Quorum books and the Hawkmoon books and Dancers at the End of Time, I know it's probably not gonna hit the same chord with me as this did. And I think that's the hallmark of genuinely great storytelling, that when you finally finish something, you're just like, holy shit, I want more of this. But I don't want more of this, because more of this would ruin the finality of what I just had. And simultaneously watching Logan and, completing Logan twice, and then reading Stormbringer, it was like a triple whammy of satiating finality that leaves you wanting more. So yeah, if my video has at all encouraged you to check these books out, I highly recommend that you do so. This is probably some of the best fantasy shit that I've ever read in my life. I feel like this is an important cornerstone of literature, period. And I also should mention, most of the books are really short. They're like 200, 250 pages long. They're basically like pulp-length books, and so because they are so short, they're not going to be a big time investment. And usually a lot of these novels aren't just one storyline. There's several storylines crammed into one, so you'll probably get even more good value for your buck than you might think. Oh, yeah, Michael Moorcock's The Elric of Melnibone Saga. It is truly the shit. It is a shame, and barely anybody seems to talk about this outside of Razorfist, me, and a couple other people, but hopefully I can help increase this motherfucker's profile because he most certainly deserves it. This does not deserve to be forgotten, especially because I think that this book series would really hit it big with people my age, or especially teenagers at that point in life where they're very much, thinking about the world, like what does this mean, what does that mean? And it is a fucking shame that more people aren't aware about this series because it is so freaking awesome. So yeah, guys, I hope I encouraged you to read the Elric of Melnibone saga. You can pretty much find it anywhere you want, and I'll even leave a chronological order, reading order, for you down in the description below. So I hope to see you guys on the next video, and bye.